Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. I still remember that night like it's carved into my skull. The air in Reno had that cold, dry bite it gets after midnight. The kind that sticks to your throat and smells faintly of exhaust and cigarette smoke. I'd been on the night shift long enough to know the rhythm. The bar fights around 11, the noise complaints just after midnight, and then the steady flow of domestic disturbances that carried us until dawn. Most of them were the same. Arguments over money, jealousy, someone drunk and angry, someone else crying. But that night at the Silver Spur Motel, that one stuck. We got the call around 12:55 a.m. Dispatch said a woman reported her boyfriend was doing something weird in their room. Exact words. No weapons mentioned, but she sounded shaken. Silver Spur was one of those places you could smell before you even pulled in. Old carpet, cigarette burns, cheap detergent, a constant faint scent of mildew and bleach that clung to everything. I'd been there a dozen times for overdoses, fights, sometimes just people screaming at no one. The place had a tired, haunted feeling to it, not in a ghost story way, but in the way places do when too much bad living piles up in the walls. When we pulled up, it was 1:10 a.m. My dashcam timestamp confirmed it later. The lot was quiet except for a flickering orange light near the stairs and the hum of the soda machine by the office. The woman was outside room 12, standing near the railing. She looked mid-30s, blonde hair messy, tears streaking down her face, wearing a big hoodie over pajama shorts. She kept glancing at the door like she was afraid it would open. Said her boyfriend had locked himself in the bathroom. Said she heard him talking. Then it went quiet, and when she tried to get in, the door was jammed. She told us she thought he might be hurting himself. We went inside. The first thing I noticed was how clean it smelled. Too clean. A sharp chemical sting in the air, like someone had poured bleach straight on the floor. The carpet near the bathroom door was damp. The lights were on, both lamps, and the TV was showing some late-night infomercial about knives. The bed was unmade, a single duffel bag half-zipped at the foot. The woman stayed by the door while we tried the bathroom. Locked. No response when we knocked and called out. I pressed my ear to the wood and heard nothing. No movement, no water running. Just silence and the faint buzzing from the fluorescent light above. We forced it open. The door stuck for a second, then gave way with a splintering crack. The bleach smell hit us full force, almost burning the eyes. The man was sitting on the floor, back against the tub, fully clothed. Jeans, t-shirt, boots still on. He was upright, head tilted slightly down, but eyes open wide, staring at nothing. Pupils blown out. No sign of trauma. No blood, no obvious struggle. He looked like he'd seen something that had frozen him in place. His skin had that pale, waxy look you sometimes see with sudden cardiac arrests. But there was something about his posture that felt off. Too rigid. Like he'd been startled mid-breath. I remember glancing up at the mirror above the sink. The way it was angled, I could see both him and myself. That's when I noticed it. His reflection wasn't sitting up. It was lying flat, like his reflection was stretched across the floor. For a second, I thought maybe the mirror was warped, or the light was catching weird off the cheap metal frame. I blinked and suddenly it matched, sitting upright again like it had never been different. My stomach twisted a little. That kind of deep unease you don't want to admit you're feeling while you're working. Just bad lighting, I told myself. Old mirrors in motels warp all the time. We checked his pulse, nothing. Cold to the touch, but not stiff yet. Probably gone less than an hour. I radioed for medical while my partner started photographing the scene. That's when I noticed the shower curtain. It was pulled closed, but the bottom edge was smeared with something faint. Maybe cleaner, maybe soap residue. I pulled it back and froze. The wall behind the tub was covered in writing. Not carved or painted. It looked like someone had used a piece of charcoal or burnt wood, maybe from a lighter. The words were scrawled over and over, shaky handwriting that looped and cramped near the end, like whoever wrote it had been in a hurry. It said, "Don't look in the mirror at 113 dozens of times." Same sentence again and again. Some lines darker, pressed harder into the wall. Some almost fading. I looked at my watch, 1:16. My chest felt tight. My partner was standing behind me, silent. The flash from his camera lighting the wall in quick bursts. He didn't say anything either. The woman outside started crying louder, asking if he was okay, but we didn't answer right away. We just kept looking at that wall. When the paramedics arrived, we cleared out of the bathroom. They confirmed what we already knew. He was gone. The coroner took photos, bagged his hands, and we stepped out to let them work. The woman was sitting on the edge of the bed now, rocking slightly, staring at the floor. Her eyes looked hollow, like she was running on fumes. She kept saying she'd only stepped out for a minute, that he'd been fine an hour ago. Said they'd been cleaning up, that he was acting normal, then suddenly distant. I wrote everything down mechanically, but I wasn't really hearing her. My head was back in that bathroom, trying to make sense of what I saw. When we wrapped the call, it was around 3 a.m. I went back to the car to log the footage. My body cam had been running since we arrived. I scrolled through the timestamps. We entered the room at 1:13 a.m. exactly. The same minute written all over that wall. That stuck with me more than anything. There was no reason for it, no logic, just a strange, perfect alignment that made the hair on my neck rise. I watched a few seconds of the footage, the part where we kicked the door, the man sitting there, and then I stopped. Something about the reflection in the video didn't look right, even in that tiny screen. I shut it off and never played it again. The autopsy came back a few weeks later. Cause of death, acute heart failure. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing unusual in his blood. They said his heart just stopped. Happens sometimes, they said. People die sitting upright all the time. The file was closed within the month. No foul play, no clear reason to dig deeper. But I've thought about that mirror more times than I can count. Not because I think it was haunted or cursed. I don't believe in that crap. But because I still can't explain what I saw. Maybe the light bounced off at the perfect wrong angle. Maybe the bleach fumes or fatigue messed with my perception. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my head. The flash of seeing his reflection lying flat. The words on the wall, the timestamp matching perfectly. Sometimes, on quieter nights when I'm parked alone writing reports, I'll glance up at my own reflection in the rearview mirror and feel that same strange unease. That sense that for a split second, what I'm seeing isn't quite lining up. Just a trick of the eye, I tell myself, like before. But I don't linger on it. Not anymore. After that call, I stopped taking the silver spur cases when I could help it. Told the rookies it was just a dump full of meth heads and bleach smells. But the truth is, every time I drive past that stretch of South Virginia Street, I look at the rusted sign and think of that bathroom, the smell, the writing, the cold face of that man who looked like he'd seen something unbearable. And the reflection that didn't match until I blinked. It's been years now. The motel's still there, though half the rooms are boarded up. Someone painted over the bathroom wall after the investigation. But part of me wonders if the writing ever really came off. I still have the body cam footage in the case archive under my name. Technically, I could pull it up any time. Sometimes I think about doing it, just to see if what I remember is what really happened. But then I think about that clock reading 1:13 on my dash, and I decide not to. Because no matter how rational you are, there's a line between curiosity and something else, something you don't come back from once you cross it. So I leave it alone. That footage will sit there forever, gathering digital dust sealed away in evidence storage. And I'll keep telling myself it was just the light, just fatigue, just another night on patrol. But every so often when I catch my reflection not quite moving the same as me, I feel that chill again, crawling up from my stomach. That's when I look away. You get used to weird calls when you work highway patrol. You learn not to let your imagination run wild. You deal with drunks who fall asleep behind the wheel at rest stops, people who pull over and forget their hazards on, or cars abandoned because someone ran out of gas. Most of it's routine, but there are a few calls that don't leave your head no matter how many years pass. The one from that rest stop still sticks with me. It was around 4 in the morning, early spring, a few years back. The air was cold enough that your breath fogged when you talked, but the snow had already melted from the ditches. I remember that morning clearly because it had been unusually quiet on the radio. I'd parked near mile marker 1 and 12 on I-40, sipping burnt gas station coffee that tasted like metal. My partner and I were half asleep when dispatch crackled through, saying a trucker had called in about a suspicious vehicle at the eastbound rest area just past the state line. Said the car had been sitting there for almost an hour, engine still running, lights on, nobody inside. He'd pulled in for a break, noticed it, waited a bit, then decided to call it in because something just didn't feel right. We get calls like that sometimes, so I didn't think much of it. We flipped around and headed that way. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east, that dull gray-blue before dawn. The rest stop was one of those small ones. A handful of vending machines, a few picnic tables, a single bathroom building with flickering fluorescent lights. When we pulled in, the place was empty except for one semi parked near the entrance, and the car the trucker had mentioned. Way in the back corner near the tree line, it was a silver Toyota Camry, headlights still on, engine idling softly, windows fogged over from the inside. No movement. I remember how the exhaust came out in thick white puffs in the cold air. We parked a few feet behind it, lights off. I walked up to the driver's side window and knocked. No response. The condensation on the glass made it hard to see inside, but I could make out shapes. Purse in the passenger seat, phone cable plugged in, some kind of blanket or jacket in the back. The radio was off, engine humming quietly. When I opened the door, I immediately felt the warmth. The air inside was humid, like someone had been sitting there sweating. The driver's seat was damp, not soaked but definitely wet. I touched it with my glove. Not from rain, not from spilled coffee. It was clammy, warm, and unmistakably sweat. The smell of it was sharp, human. I could feel how recently someone had been sitting there. The purse on the passenger seat was open, wallet still inside. No signs of struggle, no torn fabric or broken glass. Just an empty car that felt like it had been abandoned seconds before we got there. Her phone was dead, still plugged into the charger, screen black. I ran the license plate through dispatch. It came back to a woman named Denise Harper, 36 years old, from Knoxville. Then the next line came over the radio. She'd been reported missing 2 days earlier by her sister. That got my attention. We started checking the area immediately. The rest stop wasn't big, just a paved loop with some trees and a small grassy slope leading down to a drainage ditch. I walked around with my flashlight, scanning every dark corner. The bathroom was empty. Trash cans were half full, nothing unusual. I followed the edge of the lot into the tree line, shining my light between the trunks. No tracks that I could see, though the ground was covered in old leaves and the soil was soft. My partner radioed me, saying he'd found something odd. The car's voice memo app was open on her phone. Apparently it had been recording until the battery died. He replayed the last few seconds over the car's Bluetooth. The sound was faint, just the hiss of road noise and breathing. Then a whisper, a woman's voice. "He's still following me." And then silence. It sent a chill down my back. We called for backup, asked dispatch to pull the rest stop's security footage. There was only one camera, mounted above the vending machines, angled toward the parking lot. The footage showed her car pulling in at 3:12 a.m., lights on and parking exactly where we found it. She never got out. No other vehicles pulled in or left in that time. No one walked up, no shadows, nothing. Just her car sitting there idling for 50 minutes until we arrived at 4:03. We widened the search as soon as backup arrived. Checked the ditches, the woods, the road shoulders, both directions for half a mile. No footprints, no tire tracks except her own. It was as if she'd vanished from inside that car. We towed the vehicle for evidence, and I helped go through it later that morning back at the impound lot. Inside, we found her phone, purse, a half-empty water bottle, and an overnight bag. Everything pointed to a normal trip. Her gas tank was half full, no mechanical issues. The driver's seat adjusted for her height, key still in the ignition. But that smell of sweat lingered, like pure panic. It was strongest on the seatbelt strap, as if she'd been gripping it tight. Investigators looked into the voice memo. It had started recording about 20 minutes before she pulled into the rest stop. The audio was mostly her breathing, the hum of tires on the road, sometimes muttering to herself. Almost there. Just stay calm. Then a few faint clicks, like she was checking her mirrors. Near the end, her voice dropped to that whisper, "He's still following me." Then it cuts out. Traffic cameras along the interstate confirmed her car traveling east from Knoxville the night she disappeared. Another vehicle, a dark pickup, maybe a Chevy, appeared behind her on a few of those frames, but never close enough for a plate. Then it vanishes just before the stretch where she pulled off. The area around that rest stop has no other exits or towns nearby. Just trees, hills, and a few service roads used by utility workers. We searched those too for days, nothing. Weeks passed. The case went cold. No one ever came forward. Her family said she'd been on her way to visit a friend in Asheville. They had no idea why she'd stop at that rest area. It was off her route. Sometimes I think about that seat, how it was still warm when we opened the door, like she'd just stepped out seconds earlier. But there were no footprints, no sign of a struggle, no trace of her anywhere. It didn't add up. The more we looked, the less sense it made. About a month later, I drove past that same rest stop again on a late shift. I pulled in out of habit. The vending machine still buzzed. The same lights flickered above the bathrooms. Everything looked the same, just empty. I parked in the same spot where her car had been, shut off the engine, and sat there listening to the quiet hum of the highway in the distance. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. I thought about how she must have felt, being followed for miles, heart racing, looking for a safe place to pull over. Maybe she thought the rest stop would have people around, or lights, or cameras. Maybe she waited for someone to arrive, but no one came soon enough. The official report says, "Missing person, last seen at rest area, possible abduction." But there's never been proof of that. No struggle, no witnesses, no second vehicle confirmed. Sometimes when I think back, I wonder if she got out and ran into the woods trying to hide from whoever was behind her. It was cold, dark, easy to get turned around. Maybe she slipped down the slope or into one of the old culverts by the creek. We searched them, but those woods stretch for miles. Other times I think maybe whoever was following her waited until she stopped, then pulled in with their lights off, parked just beyond camera range. Maybe they approached quietly, maybe she knew them. Maybe she got out thinking she was safe. Whatever happened, it happened fast. Years later, her case file still sits in the drawer marked unsolved. Every once in a while, I'll see her picture in a folder during training refreshers, smiling, brown hair, bright eyes, and I'll feel that same unease in my gut. The car with the engine still running, the warm seat, the dead phone, the voice saying, "He's still following me." I've seen a lot of strange things on this job, but that one feels different. Like we arrived seconds too late, right after something ended or began. I still don't know which. All I know is she vanished into thin air less than 50 miles from home, leaving behind a car that felt alive when we touched it. And every time I drive past that rest stop now, I can't help but look at that same corner spot. It's always empty, but I can still picture her headlights glowing there in the fog, engine running, waiting for help that never came. We were out near the edge of Cascade County, about 40 miles north of Great Falls, when the call came in. A family camping near the Marias River reported their 8-year-old boy missing. He'd wandered off sometime around sunset, and after a few hours of searching on their own, they'd called for help. It was already dark when the sheriff's office got involved, and by the time I arrived it was close to 10 p.m. The air had that cold, damp bite that comes right before the first frost, and the fields around the campsites were open and quiet, bordered by wheat that stretched toward the horizon. We parked our trucks on a dirt road just past the tree line, and set up a temporary command post under a floodlight. The boy's name was Mason. He'd last been seen near a grove of cottonwoods by the river, wearing a red jacket and jeans. The area around the campsite was flat, but surrounded by scattered tree clusters and small ravines where a kid could easily get lost. I'd been on enough searches to know that the first few hours were the most important. Once the night got deep and the temperature dropped, things could turn bad quickly, especially for a child that age. By 11 p.m., we had a dozen people combing the area. Deputies, volunteers, a couple of fire guys, and even a few neighbors who'd driven out after hearing about it on the scanner. Drones were up with thermal cameras, their faint hums drifting over the fields. From where I stood near the command post, I could see the faint orange glow of campfires scattered in the distance and the sweep of flashlight beams moving in slow lines through the wheat. The radio chatter was constant but calm. Someone thought they found shoe prints near a fence line, but they turned out to be old. Another team checked near the riverbank, found nothing. The family stayed close to the sheriff's truck. The mother sat on a folding chair, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and motionless. The father kept pacing, hands shoved in his jacket, answering questions he probably didn't even hear. I remember thinking how small their campsite looked in all that open country. Just a few tents, a cooler, and an empty fire ring. Around 2:30 a.m., one of the drone operators called out. They'd picked up a heat signature, human-sized, standing still in the middle of a wheat field about half a mile west of the campsite. The operator replayed the footage for us. The figure was motionless, upright, and facing away from the drone camera. It didn't move even as the drone hovered directly above it. The sheriff told me and another deputy, Warren, to go check it out. We grabbed flashlights and radios, climbed into one of the ATVs, and headed out toward the coordinates. The drive across the field was slow. The ground was uneven, the wheat tall and dry, whispering against the sides of the vehicle. The headlights caught the pale stalks, bending them into shimmering waves. It was quiet except for the low hum of the motor and the soft static from the radio. About halfway there, we cut the lights and went the rest of the way on foot to avoid confusing whoever, or whatever, we were walking toward. The drone operator guided us over the radio, telling us we were within 50 yards, then 30, then 20. And then we saw him, a small figure standing dead still in the wheat. The stalks around him barely moved in the night breeze. He was facing away from us about 20 feet ahead. The red jacket was unmistakable even in the dim light. We stopped and watched for a few seconds, just making sure we weren't seeing things. He wasn't shivering or fidgeting, just completely still, like he was waiting for something. His hands hung at his sides, head tilted slightly down. I remember how wrong that stillness felt. Kids don't stand like that, especially not alone in the dark. We slowly stepped forward. My boots made soft crunches against the dry ground, and each sound felt too loud. I tried to see if anyone else was out there, someone hiding or standing nearby. But the field was empty. When we got within 10 feet, I called it in quietly over the radio that we'd found the boy. Warren moved around to his side while I stayed behind him. The beam of my flashlight brushed across the back of his jacket, then his face as he turned toward us. His eyes were wide open. He didn't blink or flinch when the light hit him. His face was pale, lips slightly parted, and for a second he just stared past us like we weren't even there. His hair was damp from the dew, and there were streaks of dirt down his cheeks. When he finally moved, it was slow and mechanical, like it took him effort. He looked right at me and his mouth opened slightly. His voice was soft, almost flat. I remember the exact words because they stuck in my head long after. He told me to wait here. After that, he just stood there again. Didn't move, didn't speak. Warren gently took his shoulder, and he didn't resist or say anything else. We radioed it in, and a rescue unit came to meet us halfway back. They wrapped him in a blanket and checked his vitals. Cold but okay. The family rushed over when we got to the command post, and the mother dropped to her knees when she saw him. It was nearly 3 a.m. by then. Everyone was exhausted but relieved. The sheriff had the medics take the boy to the hospital in town to get checked out. Once things settled down and the family left, most of the volunteers headed home. The searchlights came down, and by dawn only a few of us remained. The sheriff told me to grab some rest before heading back to town, but I couldn't sleep. Something about the way the boy had been standing in that field just didn't sit right. So after sunrise, I went back. The wheat was still heavy with dew, the sun just starting to push through the haze. I parked near the same spot and walked in on foot. The ground was soft and I found the place right away. Flattened stalks where the boy had stood. His footprints were small and spaced close together, turned slightly inward like he'd been standing still for a long time. I crouched down to look more closely, tracing the path he must have walked in from. That's when I noticed there were two sets of prints. The first set was his, small distinct tread marks from children's sneakers. The second set was larger, barefoot, the impressions deeper, with clear outlines of toes pressed into the damp soil. They came from the direction of the tree line about 30 yards away, stopped right behind where the boy had been standing, and then turned back toward the woods. The spacing suggested whoever it was had been walking calmly, not running or stumbling. The stride was long, adult-sized, but not heavy like someone wearing boots, just bare feet against the cold ground. I followed them as far as I could. They weaved slightly, then cut toward the far end of the field before vanishing into the grass near the fence. Beyond that was a drainage ditch and another stretch of open field leading to a dirt road. There were no tire marks, no other footprints, nothing. Whoever it was had either walked out of there before the dew set or disappeared into the brush before dawn. I flagged the area and called it in. A couple of deputies came out to check, and we photographed everything before the sun dried the ground. The sheriff asked if I was sure they were fresh. I was. The prints were clean, no overlap from our own boots, no signs of weathering, just two sets. One belonging to a boy, the other to someone barefoot in the cold. We canvassed the area for the rest of the morning. No camps, no discarded clothing, no sign of anyone passing through. The family didn't recognize the prints, and the boy wouldn't talk much. He seemed fine physically, but barely said anything beyond that one phrase he'd spoken the night before. He told the doctors he didn't remember leaving the campsite, didn't remember being in the field, didn't remember who told him to wait. After a few days, the search was officially closed. The report listed him as found unharmed, and the footprints were noted but left unexplained. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when I drive through those open fields north of town. The way he stood there, motionless in all that dark, and how those other prints led right up to him. I've worked plenty of missing person cases since, but that one stays with me because it didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like we'd interrupted something, like whoever made those barefoot tracks had been there with him, waiting in the quiet until we showed up. And whoever it was, they walked back into the night without a trace. It was 1:10 a.m. when dispatch sent me and Rodriguez to the Silver Spur Motel on 4th Street. That place always gave me a bad feeling. Cheap rooms, broken neon sign buzzing outside, and the kind of stale air that clung to cigarette smoke and regret. We'd been there dozens of times before. Mostly domestic disputes, drunks yelling in the parking lot or people trying to sleep off their high. I remember the rain had just started. A light drizzle that turned the lot into a mirror of orange streetlights. The tires crackled on wet gravel when we pulled up. A woman was waiting near the edge of the sidewalk under one of the flickering lamps. She was barefoot, wrapped in a motel towel, shaking like she'd just come out of an ice bath. Even from the car, I could see her eyes were red, her breathing uneven. She kept looking back toward one of the rooms. Number 12, ground floor, last one before the stairwell. She told us her boyfriend had locked himself in the bathroom, doing something weird. That's all she said at first. I remember she hugged her arms like she was trying to hold herself together, and her whole body trembled when she pointed at the door. She wouldn't go back inside. Rodriguez gave her a calm nod and stayed near her while I went to check the door. The air changed the second I stepped into that room. It wasn't just the smell. It was the silence. The TV was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. Some late-night infomercial flickered on the screen, throwing a soft blue light across the walls. The bed was messy, sheets half off, clothes on the floor, an open duffel bag by the foot of the bed. But what really hit me was the smell of bleach. It was sharp, almost metallic, so strong it burned the back of my throat. It was fresh, too. Not the faint smell of cleaning supplies from earlier in the day, but like someone had just poured it. The bathroom door was shut tight. A faint yellow light glowed through the bottom gap. I could see a thin trail of moisture along the tiles outside it. Not puddles, just a faint dampness, like someone had wiped up something wet in a hurry. I knocked twice, firm, announced police, asked for the man inside to respond. Nothing. No sound, no movement, not even the shifting of air from the vent. Rodriguez came in behind me, told me the woman was waiting outside and wouldn't come near the door. He tried the knob, locked. He looked at me, shrugged slightly, and then stepped back to give it a solid kick. The cheap wooden door gave way on the second hit, swinging inward. The smell inside the bathroom was stronger, almost suffocating. The bleach smell mixed with something else. Warm air, like steam that had no reason to be there. My eyes stung a bit when I stepped closer. The fan was on, humming softly. He was sitting on the floor beside the bathtub. Fully dressed, jeans, gray hoodie, shoes still on, upright, back against the tub, head tilted slightly as if he'd frozen mid-thought. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the opposite wall. They didn't look panicked, more like blank. As if whatever had happened, it had caught him completely off guard. His mouth was slightly open and his lips were blue. There was a small kitchen timer on the floor beside his left hand. White plastic, cheap, the kind you find in dollar stores. The dial was set to 00, but it wasn't making any noise. It looked like it had already gone off long ago, but for some reason it hadn't been moved. Rodriguez crouched beside him and checked for a pulse. I remember the sound of his gloves rubbing against the man's wrist, the tiny squeak of latex in the quiet. Then he looked up and said quietly, almost like he was talking to himself, "It's warm in here." That didn't make sense. The rest of the room was cool. The heater wasn't on, and the air outside was barely above freezing. But in that bathroom, the air felt thick and heavy like it had been trapped. The tub was bone dry. Not a single drop of water, yet the grout lines between the tiles were damp. The drain shined like it had been scrubbed clean. No residue, no hair, nothing. I knelt down to check, and the bleach smell hit me even stronger. It made my eyes water. I could tell from the pattern of dampness that water had been there not long before, then drained and cleaned. But someone had been careful. Too careful. No blood, no vomit, no signs of struggle. Just that spotless drain, and a man sitting perfectly upright like someone had posed him. His hands rested loosely on his thighs, fingers slightly curled. It didn't look natural, but not forced either. Like he'd gone still in the middle of doing something and never started moving again. Rodriguez stepped out to call it in while I stayed and looked around. I checked the sink, also dry, wiped clean. The mirror had faint streaks, maybe from a towel or shirt. The towels hanging were damp but not soaked. The trash bin was empty, except for one folded paper towel, bright white. No toothbrush, no razor, no toiletries. Nothing that showed anyone had actually been staying there for more than a night. The kitchen timer bothered me. I kept staring at it. There was something about it that didn't fit. Why would he bring a timer into a motel bathroom? There was no cooking gear around, no drugs, no needles, no chemical containers. Just bleach, faint traces on the tiles near the tub and sink. It was deliberate. That's what got me. Whoever had done this, or whatever he'd done to himself, it wasn't random. When the coroner came, they loaded him up quietly. I stood in the doorway while they zipped the bag, that same smell of bleach faintly clinging to the air. Rodriguez leaned against the wall, silent, staring at the timer still sitting on the floor. I told him I'd take it to evidence. I remember picking it up, light as air, cold plastic against my glove. It was completely clean. As we packed up, I heard it. Just one click, a single tick from the timer, nothing else. Rodriguez froze and looked at me, but neither of us said anything. We just stood there for a long second, staring at the thing in my hand. Then nothing, no ticking, no movement. I bagged it, wrote the time, and we left. Outside, the woman was sitting on the curb wrapped in a blanket. She asked something, but I barely heard her. The rain had picked up, tapping softly against the cruiser. The smell of bleach seemed to follow us all the way to the station. Autopsy came back 2 weeks later. Cardiac arrest. No drugs, no trauma, no sign of poisoning. Everything in his blood was clean. He'd been healthy, mid-30s, no history of heart problems. They wrote it off as sudden cardiac death, natural causes. But it didn't sit right. I'd seen sudden cardiac cases before. They never looked like that. The posture, the setting, the bleach, the timer, all too exact. Like he'd set up the scene for something specific. There were no fingerprints on the timer besides his. No sign of anyone else in the room. I kept thinking about the grout lines, the warmth, that single tick. I drove by the Silver Spur a few months later. Room 12 had a new door, fresh paint, new number plate. Someone else was staying there. But I could still smell the faint chemical bite when I rolled the window down. The motel manager said they'd redone the whole bathroom after that night. Replaced tiles, new tub, even new plumbing because the bleach had corroded the drain metal. Sometimes I wonder what he was doing in there before it happened. Maybe he'd been cleaning up something. Maybe trying to destroy evidence of something I'll never know. Or maybe he was experimenting, pushing himself in some way that went too far. But that timer, that's what stays in my head. When a timer hits 0, it's supposed to stop. That one didn't, it waited. It clicked once more, hours after it should have been done. And I still don't know why every now and then, when I'm alone in the patrol car late at night, I swear I hear that same single tick. Not a steady tick-tock, not mechanical, just one sharp sound, like something quietly reminding me that the clock's still running somewhere, and maybe we just haven't reached 0 yet. I was a rookie then, still learning how to carry myself in uniform, still figuring out how to keep my hands from shaking when the radio crackled. My partner, Reeves, had been around longer than I'd been alive. He had that calm, slow way about him that only came from seeing too much for too long. We were parked under a flickering streetlight when the call came through just after midnight. Noise complaint, Pelican Avenue. People said they'd been hearing yelling from one of the old houses that had been sitting empty since Katrina. Pelican Avenue was one of those streets that looked like it had been forgotten by time. Half the houses were shells, their siding warped, roofs caved in, windows covered with mismatched boards. The yards were jungles of weeds and broken fences. You could still see the faint water lines on the brickwork where the flood had once risen. It was quiet except for the hum of insects and the far-off rumble of a train. The air had that thick, swampy heaviness that made your clothes stick to your skin. We pulled up in front of the house. Number 146. I remember it because someone had spray-painted it in red across the front door years ago. The porch sagged under its own weight, the railing half gone. A rusted chain looped across the front door handles, padlocked tight. Reeves killed the engine, and for a second the silence pressed in. Then faintly from inside the house came a sound. Wasn't clear at first, just something low and ragged, like wind slipping through cracks. But as we stood there, it shaped into something that made the back of my neck tighten. It was a voice, weak, muffled. "Help me." That's what it sounded like. Reeves gave me a look, his jaw tightening. He reached into the trunk for the crowbar we kept for forced entries, and I followed him around to the back. The yard was overgrown, thick with tall grass that hid pieces of debris. Old chairs, a tire, something that looked like a refrigerator door half buried in mud. The back door was swollen and warped, but the lock was brittle. A couple of hits with the bar and the latch gave out. The smell hit first. It was the kind of smell that never leaves your head once you know it. Mold, rot, old wood soaked with dampness, and something sour underneath it all. The air felt heavy, wet, almost sticky. We stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the dark. The beams hit walls that were soft and bubbled with water damage. Peeling wallpaper hung like strips of skin. The floor creaked under every step, soft spots giving slightly with our weight. Somewhere deep in the house, that voice came again. fainter now. Like whoever it was knew we were there and was holding on. We moved slowly. Every sound felt amplified. The crunch of plaster under boots, the low groan of the structure. I tried calling out once, but my own voice just died in the thick air. Reeves signaled with his light toward the stairs and then pointed me toward the kitchen. He'd go up. I'd stay down. The kitchen looked like it had been gutted years ago. Cabinets ripped out, sink rusted through, the counter covered in old newspapers and rotted wood. A single chair lay on its side, one leg missing. There were rat droppings on the windowsill, and when I opened a cabinet, a family of cockroaches scattered. The air was colder near the floor, and when I crouched I could see faint drag marks in the dust, like something or someone had been pulled across the linoleum. They led toward the hallway. Then Reeves shouted from upstairs. His voice carried through the empty space, echoing off the walls. I ran up, heart hammering, the stairs flexing under my boots. My flashlight beam jumped with each step. Reeves was standing at the end of the hallway, his light fixed on a small door. It was one of those narrow ones, barely big enough for storage. The paint around it was cracked and darkened by moisture. When he opened it, I expected to see nothing. Just an empty closet, maybe old clothes or junk left behind. Instead, there was a man. He was crouched in the far corner, trying to shield his face from the light. His clothes hung off him in tatters, filthy and colorless. His skin was the pale yellow-gray of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. His hair was long, matted, his beard tangled to his chest. His eyes blinked against the light, wide and wild. He was shaking uncontrollably. I remember the smell hit me again, this time worse. Sweat, dirt, rot, and something metallic. He was muttering something, but it came out broken, slurred. Words running into each other. I couldn't make any of it out. Just fragments. Brother, food, please, we called it in. EMS was dispatched. Reeves helped him out, slow and careful, like handling a wounded animal. The man's knees buckled with every step. His skin stuck to the floor where he fell. He looked at both of us like he couldn't tell if we were real. By the time the ambulance got there, he was barely conscious. His pulse was weak, his lips cracked and white. They strapped him onto the gurney and carried him out. He didn't say another word. Reeves and I stayed behind to clear the rest of the house. It didn't take long. 2 bedrooms upstairs, both stripped bare. No bedding, no furniture, no signs of anyone else. We checked the windows. Every one of them was boarded shut from the outside. When we went back to that closet, I noticed the inside of the door. There was a heavy bolt lock on the inside. It looked newer than the rest of the house. Clean metal against rotten wood. That stuck with me. We cleared the scene, did our report, and went back to the station. I remember sitting at my desk trying to write what we'd found. Staring at the part where I had to describe the man. I couldn't make sense of it. Reeves didn't say much. He just sat across from me, rubbing the bridge of his nose, looking more tired than usual. Around 3 in the morning, we got word from the hospital. The man didn't make it. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, infection. They tried, but it was too late. No ID, no wallet, no record of him anywhere. The report listed him as John Doe, approximately 40s. I couldn't let it go. After shift, I drove back to Pelican Avenue just as the sky was starting to lighten. The house looked different in the early dawn. Less threatening, almost hollow. I walked around it again. The front door chain was still in place, padlock sealed. The back door hung open where we'd forced it. I looked at the bolt on that closet again. If it had been locked from the inside, no one could have locked him in there. But if someone else had, they'd have had to find another way out. I went over every inch of that upstairs hallway, the floorboards, the window boards. The nails were rusted solid. No loose paneling, no hidden trapdoor. The dust was undisturbed except for our own footprints and his. It didn't make sense. The only thing that did was the smell of old rot and the faint sound of the street outside waking up again. I stood there trying to picture it. How long he'd been in there, what he'd eaten, how he'd lasted. Maybe he'd locked himself in to stay safe from someone else. Maybe that someone had been long gone. Maybe he just never found the strength to unlock it again. I left the house as the sun started to hit the rooftops. It looked like every other abandoned place in that neighborhood. Another leftover from a storm everyone wanted to forget. A week later, The report was closed. Unidentified male. Cause of death, dehydration and starvation. Case status, inactive. But every now and then when I think about that house, I still see that bolt in my head. Bright, clean, out of place. I see the drag marks on the kitchen floor and the faint fingerprints on the inside of that door. And I think about how, when we first walked up that night, the voice was calling for help from behind a door that no one else could have locked. It was locked from the inside. And yet he was calling for someone to let him out. I was working night shift on the Colorado side of Raton Pass, a long, lonely stretch of highway that twisted through the mountains with nothing but black pine and cold wind for company. My patrol car was the only light for miles, the beams cutting through the dark like a knife through smoke. Nights out there always felt endless. The road had this way of swallowing sound. My tires on the asphalt, the hum of the engine, even my own breathing inside the car. It all seemed muffled. I'd been through that section hundreds of times and I'd learned to respect it. Raton Pass had taken plenty of people over the years. Truckers misjudging turns, snowstorms catching tourists off guard, black ice that looked just like wet pavement. You learned to pay attention to every little thing out there. It was around 3:30 in the morning when it happened. I just passed mile marker 213, sipping burnt coffee from a thermos when the radio crackled. Not the normal kind of interference you get up there, but a sharp burst of static followed by a pause. Then something faint. I turned the volume up, leaning closer. Between the static, I heard it. Help me. I'm stuck. Call box 7. The voice was thin, like it was traveling through layers of fog. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. For a moment, I just sat there, listening. The transmission didn't repeat. I called dispatch, asked if anyone else had gotten that, but all I got was dead air. I tried again, nothing. The radio was silent like it had never happened. I checked my watch. 3:33 a.m. The wind outside had picked up, whistling low across the pass. The problem was those old call boxes hadn't been working in years. Colorado DOT had phased them out around 2008 when cell coverage got better. They were still standing in a few places, sun-faded yellow posts with dead wires hanging inside, but they hadn't been connected to anything in over a decade. I knew because I'd been assigned to a traffic fatality on that same stretch a couple years back, right near one of those boxes. The maintenance guys told me they were just relics now, left because removing them cost too much. Still, the call had come through, and call box 7 was a specific spot, southbound side, about 5 miles from the New Mexico line, right near a blind curve where accidents used to happen all the time. I told myself it was probably some old interference bouncing off the mountain, maybe a cross signal from a different frequency. But I couldn't ignore it. Out there, if there's even a small chance someone's hurt, you check. The drive to call box 7 felt longer than usual. The road was empty, not a single pair of headlights in either direction. The moon was thin and low, just enough to light up the ridgelines, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. Frost was forming on the guardrails, glinting like glass when my lights hit it. The trees along the shoulder looked black and motionless, every branch stiff with cold. When I finally saw the call box, it stood right where I remembered, crooked, leaning a little, half covered in grime. I pulled over, killed the siren lights, and stepped out. The air bit hard at my face. My breath came out in long white clouds. The only sounds were the hum of my engine cooling and the wind rushing down from the pass. I walked up to the box, brushed off the frost, and tried the door. It was locked shut the way they all were now. The small speaker grill was caked with rust. It couldn't have transmitted anything even if it tried. But something felt off. Maybe it was the stillness, or maybe it was just the late hour messing with me. I stepped back, sweeping my flashlight around. The beam cut through the dark, slicing over gravel and frozen weeds. That's when I noticed them. Shoe prints in the shoulder gravel, just barely visible in the frost, fresh enough that they hadn't filled in yet. The pattern was deep, sharp at the edges, like they'd been made within the last few hours. They led down the embankment toward the trees. I stood there for a second, debating. The slope wasn't steep, but it was uneven, covered in pine needles and loose rock. I called out once just to be sure. My voice bounced off the trees and faded fast. Nothing answered, so I followed the prints. They wound through a thin patch of pines, then down a narrow run of dirt that probably hadn't seen a vehicle in years. My flashlight caught the glint of something metal up ahead, low between the trees. As I got closer, it came into focus. A car, or what was left of one. Rusted out, nose first into a stand of young aspens. The windshield was shattered inward, glass scattered across the hood and floorboards. The roof was caved slightly from where a branch had fallen. The license plate was Colorado, but faded and half covered with dirt. It took me a moment to make out the last digits. AO2. The driver's door was jammed shut by the tree trunk. I circled to the passenger side and pulled it open. It creaked hard, metal scraping metal. A sound that echoed sharp in the cold air. The smell that came out wasn't rot. Too old for that, but something dry and stale like dust and rusted fabric. Inside was the skeleton of a man still strapped into the seatbelt, head tilted slightly toward the window. His jacket had a patch near the shoulder, faded but readable. CDOT maintenance. I stood there a long time just taking it in. The radio call, the footprints, the way everything lined up with that strange message. The bones were clean, weathered, not freshly disturbed. Whatever had happened, it had been years. I backed up, took a few photos, and called it in. Dispatch thought I was joking at first until I gave the coordinates. They sent out county and the coroner from Trinidad. I stayed until they arrived, keeping my lights pointed down the slope so they could find it easier. By the time the coroner made it up, the sky was starting to lighten. He did a quick check, then turned to me and said the car probably went off the road sometime in the early 2000s, long before the boxes were shut down. Maybe a maintenance worker doing rounds late at night, missed the curve, went down too far to see from the road. The trees must have hidden the wreck from view. He said it had likely been there 15, maybe 20 years. Later, when they ran the records, they found a missing person report from 2003. A CDOT employee named Richard H. Miller. He'd been working night maintenance near Rayton Pass when he disappeared during a snowstorm. They never found his vehicle. His family had long assumed he'd gone off somewhere else, maybe left the job. No one thought to look that far down the slope. What stuck with me most, though, was the timing. The radio call had come in at 3:33 a.m., almost the exact hour the report said he'd gone missing. 3:30 in the morning on a Friday shift. I didn't tell anyone that part. They'd think it was interference or that I'd misheard. Maybe they'd be right, but I know what I heard. The voice was too clear, too deliberate. Help me, I'm stuck. Call box 7, not a recording. Not static. Person. After that night, I stopped volunteering for the graveyard shift. I told the lieutenant I preferred days closer to town. Out there on that pass, under all that black sky, you start realizing how fragile sound is, how easily it travels and how long it can linger, bouncing between mountains and time. Every now and then, when I drive that stretch in daylight, I still glance at call box 7. The box is still there, leaning the same way, silent and sun-bleached. And every time I pass it, I can't help but wonder if that voice was just trapped in the static all those years, waiting for someone to finally answer. It was one of those sticky summer nights where even the air feels tired. The kind that makes your shirt cling to your back before you even get to the car. I was working nights out of the South Precinct in Omaha, partnered up with Duke, same as always. The radio had been mostly dead all night. A couple of drunken disorderlies downtown. Some fireworks complaints that turned out to be just kids. Nothing that needed real police work. Around 2 a.m., when your eyelids start feeling heavy and your coffee's gone lukewarm, dispatch called in a welfare check. A neighbor said she hadn't seen the guy next door in 4 or 5 days, and there was a smell coming from his garage. We didn't think much of it at first. Calls like that usually meant someone's elderly relative passed quietly, or a raccoon got stuck somewhere it shouldn't have. Still, you go because you have to. The address was on the south end, off Harrison. A worn little street of older ranch-style houses, lawns overgrown, porch lights burned out. By the time we pulled up, the place looked asleep. Every house dark except one across the street where the caller must have been waiting. A porch light flickered faintly through the screen door. We got out, and right away I caught it. That faint, sour, sweet rot clinging to the air. It was faint at first, like something you could ignore if you didn't know what it meant. But the closer we got to the garage, the thicker it got, like the air itself was decaying. Duke looked at me without saying anything. We'd both been on long enough to know that smell never meant anything good. The garage door was padlocked from the outside. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. You don't lock yourself in from the outside. The lock was rusted, but the chain looked newer, like it had been replaced recently. We tried knocking, calling out. Nothing. Just the buzz of insects and the hum of a street light overhead. We radioed it in, got clearance to force entry, and cut the lock. When the chain dropped, the garage door creaked up halfway before it jammed. The smell poured out like a wave, heavy and wet. I remember feeling it in the back of my throat. Duke gagged under his breath and shined his flashlight inside. It was dark except for a single bare bulb hanging from a cord, swinging slightly like it had been bumped earlier. The flies were everywhere, crawling along the bulb, the walls, the floor. The sound of them filled the space, that low, constant droning hum that feels like it's inside your skull. The place was cluttered. Boxes stacked along the back wall, an old rusted tool chest, a workbench covered in rags and jars. Everything had that film of grime that builds up after years of no one touching anything. I stepped in first, trying to breathe through my mouth. Every step made the floor creak under my boots, the air getting warmer, thicker, until it felt like I was walking into a greenhouse filled with death. That's when I noticed the old fridge against the far wall. It was the kind of bulky white one from the 70s, yellowed with age, duct-taped along the seal. There was condensation dripping down its side even though it wasn't plugged in. The smell was stronger there. It was coming from that direction, no doubt. Duke stood to my left, shining his light directly at it. The flies were clustered thick around the edges, moving like a dark, pulsing sheet. I remember how quiet the world felt right before he opened it. Even the street outside went still, like the city was holding its breath. He grabbed the handle, pulled it open, and the bulb above us flickered once like it couldn't stand to see what was inside. There wasn't a body, no person, just rows of Ziploc bags stacked and labeled neatly, filling every shelf. The freezer part, the main section, even the crisper drawers. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them. Each bag had a date written in black marker. Some were from years back, others just weeks ago. They were filled with what looked like meat, pale, freezer-burned gray at the edges. But the sizes weren't uniform. Some pieces looked too cleanly cut, too intentional. And then I saw the one near the front, sitting on top of the rest, the label written a little darker than the others. Like he'd pressed hard with the marker. Right thigh. My stomach dropped. Duke closed the door hard, like slamming it could make it not real. We both stood there for a long moment, just breathing, trying not to look at each other. We didn't need to say it. We already knew. We backed out and radioed for homicide and forensics. I remember stepping back into the night air, how even that sticky summer air felt cold after being inside. The neighbor came out onto her porch when the first set of lights appeared, asking if everything was all right. I told her to go back inside, that we'd handle it. She didn't argue. Over the next few hours, the place turned into a crime scene. Detectives, evidence techs, photographers, all working under portable lights that buzzed louder than the crickets. The coroner showed up around 4 a.m., and I could still smell that rot hanging in the air, even though the fridge had been sealed up. When they finally went through the backyard, that's where they found him. The homeowner, shallow grave maybe 2 feet deep, right behind the garage under a half-collapsed shed. It looked like he'd been there for days. They said he was partially wrapped in a tarp, shovel still leaning against the wall nearby. Later we learned he'd been a meat packer years back, worked at a plant on the edge of town, got forced into early retirement after what they called a psychological incident. Something about him breaking down on the floor after a coworker got caught in one of the machines. He lived alone after that, mostly kept to himself. Neighbors said he was quiet, polite, sometimes burned trash late at night. No one thought much of it. The lab tests confirmed what we already knew, but didn't want to believe. The meat wasn't from animals. They matched most of it to his own remains. Samples of tissue, bone fragments. But there were other bags too, labeled with dates years before his death, some too old to test. No one could say for sure where they came from. I was off duty by sunrise, but I couldn't bring myself to go home. I drove around the city instead, windows down, trying to let the wind wash that smell out of my head. It didn't help. It never really does. Even now, when I walk through the evidence locker at work and pass by the old freezers, I can feel my stomach tighten. There's something about that kind of rot that never leaves you. It settles in the back of your mind and waits. It's been years since that night, but I still think about how ordinary it all looked from the outside. Just another quiet house on another quiet street. If the neighbor hadn't called, we might never have known what was inside that garage. Sometimes I catch myself wondering how many more houses look just like it. How many padlocked doors keep their own kind of secrets. I still work nights. The air still gets heavy in the summer. And every time I see one of those old white fridges sitting in someone's garage, even the ones just holding beer or bait, I can feel my throat close a little. I can smell that rot before I even get close. That smell doesn't fade. Not really. It just waits somewhere in the back of your memory, until one night you catch it again, faint but certain. And all at once you're back in that dark, humid garage with the flies buzzing under a single swaying bulb, staring at a Ziploc bag labeled in shaky black ink, right thigh.